Every gaze inside the committee chamber fixed itself on the witness table as a strange hush rolled through the air. Senator Lindsey Graham leaned back in his polished leather chair, a smirk curling at the corners of his mouth, radiating the smug confidence of a man utterly convinced of his own control. Across from him sat Representative Jasmine Crockett, the first-term congresswoman from Texas, whose arrival in Washington had been anything but subtle. What would unfold over the next half-minute would light up social media and permanently alter both of their careers. Graham had just delivered what he thought was a devastating blow to her credibility. His trademark Southern drawl carried a condescending ease as he dismissed her testimony on voting access, waving it off as if it were little more than political theater. For a man who'd spent decades tightening his grip on power, he couldn't possibly imagine that this particular exchange would mark one of the most spectacular missteps of his long tenure. Before we plunge headfirst into this fiery confrontation, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and hit that like button. Because trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. What you're about to see is politics at its rawest and most unpredictable. The hearing had been scheduled as a typical procedural review, a Senate Judiciary Committee session, examining proposed updates to the Voting Rights Act. Representative Crockett had been invited to testify in her capacity as a member of the House Judiciary Committee. No one expected tension. No one anticipated that this ordinary morning would soon become a headline moment replayed across every major network in America. Inside the chamber, the atmosphere carried the familiar heaviness of Washington bureaucracy. Senators shuffled papers, aides whispered urgently in corners, and journalists adjusted their cameras in the press gallery overhead. C-SPAN's quiet, detached broadcast caught every second in sterile detail. Outside the Capitol, the machinery of government turned as usual, unaware that within hours, a single exchange between two lawmakers would dominate the national conversation. Graham's critical mistake was assuming he could handle Jasmine Crockett the same way he handled everyone else who had sat before him. He assumed her youth meant inexperience. He assumed her passion meant recklessness. He assumed her newness to Washington meant she could be outmaneuvered. Every one of those assumptions would soon prove spectacularly wrong. What Graham didn't understand was that Jasmine Crockett had been preparing for moments like this for most of her professional life. As a seasoned civil rights attorney, she had faced hostile judges, dismissive colleagues, and opponents who mistook her composure for weakness. She had learned early that preparation was the ultimate weapon, and she came armed to this hearing with far more than talking points. Senator Lindsey Graham had occupied a prominent seat in American politics for decades. Before entering the Senate in 2003, he had served years in the House of Representatives, building a reputation as a sharp debater and a master manipulator of narrative. His genial Southern manner could turn into icy precision in an instant. That morning, he carried the same aura of practiced ease, the self-assurance of a man who believed he already knew how the story would end. He had scanned the witness list, seen Crockett's name, and smirked. He'd watched clips of her fiery floor speeches and viral social media moments, but to him, she was simply another ambitious freshman chasing cameras. His morning had been ordinary. Coffee with aides, quick review of South Carolina polling numbers, a strategy chat about upcoming legislation. The hearing was a formality, just another day at the office. He barely glanced at the thick briefing binder his team had prepared. But what Graham hadn't realized was that his own record, years of contradictions, sound bites and double-edged statements, had been meticulously cataloged, cross-referenced, and prepared as ammunition. He didn't think he'd need to defend himself that day. He thought he was the one asking questions. Graham built his career on moments like this, dominating hearings, putting rising politicians in their place, and reminding everyone that experience was power. He had grilled presidential nominees, Supreme Court justices, and veteran lawmakers without breaking a sweat. So when he saw Jasmine Crockett, a first-term representative barely into her 30s, he didn't see a threat. But Crockett wasn't new to pressure. She entered Congress in 2023, but long before that she had earned her stripes in the Texas House of Representatives, where she became known for her fearless advocacy on criminal justice reform and voting rights. As a lawyer, she'd represented clients nobody else would touch, fighting systemic injustice one courtroom at a time. Her skill wasn't just in rhetoric, it was in strategy. She could stay composed under fire and turn an opponent's argument back against them with precision. Her rise in politics had been deliberate, calculated, and relentless. Every viral moment, every floor speech, every hard-fought case had built toward this, her first major national stage. Her staff didn't just prepare her to testify. They prepared her for Graham himself. They studied his tactics, his triggers, his contradictions. They built a dossier thicker than any briefing book his team could have imagined, filled with his statements, votes, and hypocrisies catalogued line by line. For Crockett, this hearing was more than a policy discussion. It was a battlefield for the soul of American democracy. One side believed in expanding access to the vote, the other in defending systems of control under the guise of integrity. For her, this was a proving ground. For Graham, it was supposed to be routine. Neither had any idea they were about to create one of the most viral political moments of the decade. Nearly 2 hours into the hearing, Jasmine Crockett's time finally came. She had sat quietly, observing every detail. Graham's rhythm, his interruptions, the subtle way he cut off witnesses mid-sentence to reassert control. She'd seen him toy with the elderly civil rights activist who testified before her, interrupting 3 times just to remind her who held the gavel. The witness had stayed composed, but Crockett had caught the flicker of irritation in her eyes. Graham's entire strategy was simple. Establish dominance early, throw opponents off balance, and command the narrative. It worked on almost everyone, but not on Jasmine Crockett. But Crockett had encountered this playbook before. In courtrooms, opposing attorneys employed identical tactics. They would interrupt, condescend, attempt to provoke her into making mistakes. She had learned to maintain composure, await her moment, and strike with precision when opportunity presented itself. This hearing would be no different. When Crockett commenced her testimony, she articulated clearly and forcefully about the critical importance of voting rights protection. She cited specific instances from her district in Texas where voters had confronted unnecessary obstacles. She referenced recent legislative modifications that had made voting more challenging for working families, elderly citizens, and communities of color. Her testimony was thorough, meticulously researched, and delivered with unwavering conviction. She spoke about Maria Gonzalez, a 67-year-old grandmother from her district who had been turned away from her polling location because of a minor discrepancy in her voter registration. She described James Washington, a military veteran who'd waited 4 hours to vote because his polling site had been relocated without adequate notification. These weren't abstract policy discussions. They were real people with real experiences, and Crockett ensured the committee understood that. Graham listened with escalating impatience. Approximately halfway through Crockett's testimony, he leaned forward and interrupted her mid-sentence. "Representative Crockett," Graham stated, his voice saturated with condescension. "I appreciate your passion. I genuinely do. But you're making this far more complicated than necessary." The room tensed immediately. Other senators shifted in their seats uncomfortably. Crockett paused, her hands still resting on her prepared notes. She looked directly at Graham, her expression neutral, but her eyes sharp with awareness. Graham continued, warming to his theme. "You know, I've been doing this for a very long time. A very, very long time. And I've observed many young representatives come through here with ambitious ideas and passionate speeches. But the reality is, you don't understand how things actually function in this body. You don't grasp the complexities of election administration." Some Republicans on the committee nodded in agreement. A few Democrats appeared uncomfortable. The C-SPAN cameras captured every moment. On social media platforms, viewers were already beginning to react, sensing that something significant was unfolding. Crawford remained composed. "Senator Graham, with respect, I believe I understand quite well. I've been an attorney specializing in civil rights law for years before coming to Congress. I've represented clients who were denied their right to vote. I've studied the legislative history extensively." Graham waved his hand dismissively as though swatting away an annoying insect. "That's all well and good. But this is the United States Senate. This is where their work gets accomplished. And frankly, Representative, your approach is exactly what's wrong with politics today. All emotion, no substance. All performance, no policy." That was themament. That was when Graham crossed the boundary from rigorous questioning into outright mockery. His smirk widened as he surveyed the room, gauging reactions from his colleagues. He believed he had delivered a devastating blow. He believed he had put this young upstart firmly in her place. The Democratic senators appeared angry, but uncertain about how to intervene without making matters worse. The Republican senators seemed pleased with Graham's performance. The committee chairman glanced at the clock, perhaps hoping to advance to the next witness and avoid further conflict. But Crockett wasn't finished. Not even close. She straightened in her chair, and when she spoke again, her voice maintained its steadiness, but carried an edge that compelled everyone in the room to pay attention. "Senator Graham," she began, and the temperature in the room seemed to plummet several degrees. "I find it genuinely interesting that you would lecture me about substance and policy when you have spent the last several years proving you possess neither." Graham's smirk faltered. The other senators leaned forward. On social media, the clip was already being extracted and shared. The tension in the room was palpable, electric. Crockett wasn't finished. She extracted a folder from her briefcase with deliberate, calculated precision. "Since you want to discuss understanding how things work, let me remind you of your own record." Senator Graham attempted to interrupt. "Representative—" I don't think Senator Crockett cut him off sharply, her voice like a blade. "You interrupted me multiple times during my testimony. I believe I'm entitled to respond to your characterization of my work. Unless you'd like to explain to the American people why you can dish it out but can't take it." The committee chairman shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. Graham sat back in his chair, his face wringing slightly. He had lost control of the moment, and everyone in the room recognized it. Crockett continued, her voice gaining strength and authority. "You mentioned that you've been doing this for a long time. That's accurate. You've been in Congress for nearly 30 years, and in those 30 years, you've reversed position on almost every major issue you've ever held, depending on which way the political winds were blowing." She opened her folder with deliberate precision. The blue cover was distinctive against the wood grain of the witness table. Every senator in the room recognized what was happening. Crockett had arrived with documentation. This wasn't going to be an emotional outburst that Graham could dismiss. This was going to be surgical. She began reading each citation documented, each reversal laid out with precision. The room watched in stunned silence as Crockett systematically dismantled Graham's credibility piece by piece. "In 2016, you characterized Donald Trump as a race-baiting, xenophobic religious bigot. You stated that if the Republican Party nominated him, it would destroy the party, and you would deserve it. Those were your words, Senator. Your exact words." She paused, allowing that statement to resonate. Several senators shifted uncomfortably. The press gallery was completely silent, every reporter frantically documenting what was unfolding. On social media, clips of this moment were already being shared, though the full impact wouldn't become clear for several more minutes. "You called him a crook. You declared he was unfit for office. You said that voting for him would be a mistake, America would regret. I have the transcripts here, Senator, if you'd like me to read them in full. Multiple interviews where you explained in great detail why Donald Trump should never be president." Graham's face had transitioned from red to pale. He knew what was coming next. Then, once he became president, you became one of his most loyal defenders. You played golf with him. You praised him at every opportunity. You defended his actions, no matter how contradictory they were, to your previously stated principles. So when you talk to me about substance and policy, Senator, understand that I actually believe in the positions I advocate for. I don't change them based on political convenience. The Democratic senators were attempting not to smile. Even some Republicans looked uncomfortable. The internet was exploding. Hashtags were trending within minutes. But Crockett wasn't done. "You want to talk about voting rights? Let's talk about voting rights. In 2006, you voted to reauthorize the Voting Rights Act. You called it essential to American democracy. Then, after the Supreme Court gutted it in 2013, you refused to support efforts to restore it. When states immediately began implementing restrictive voting laws that disproportionately affected black and brown voters, you were silent. When I brought up specific examples in my testimony, you dismissed them as emotion over substance." She leaned forward, her eyes locked on Graham with laser focus. "So, here's what I understand, Senator. I understand that you've been in Washington so long that you've forgotten what it means to actually stand for something. I understand that you've become so comfortable with power that you think you can dismiss anyone who challenges you, and I understand that you severely underestimated me." The silence in the room was deafening. Absolute. Graham opened his mouth to respond, but no words emerged. He looked around for support from his colleagues, but they were avoiding eye contact. The moment had gotten away from him completely. Finally, Graham managed to speak, his voice noticeably less confident. "Representative Crockett, I think you're being what, Senator? Emotional? Passionate? Not understanding how things work. Crockett's voice was sharp as a blade. Or am I being exactly what you can't handle? A black woman who refuses to be talked down to, who came prepared with facts and receipts, who won't let you get away with your condescending nonsense. The committee room erupted, not in shouting or chaos, but in a wave of murmurs and reactions. Democratic senators were nodding in agreement. Some Republicans looked shocked. The press gallery was frantically typing on laptops and phones. Graham tried one more time to regain control. I think we should move on to the next. We can move on whenever. You're ready, Senator Crockett said, her voice calm now, almost gentle. But I want to make one thing perfectly clear to you and to everyone watching. When you try to diminish me, when you try to dismiss my work, when you try to mock my passion for justice, you're not just attacking me. You're attacking every young person who believes politics can be better. You're attacking every person of color who has been told they don't belong in these spaces. You're attacking every woman who has been talked over and talked down to by men who think their experience matters more than her expertise. She gathered her papers with deliberate care. I came here to testify about voting rights because I believe every American deserves to have their voice heard in our democracy. You tried to silence mine. You failed. And that, Senator Graham, is what I understand about how things work. Crockett sat back in her chair. Graham said nothing. The chairman quickly called for a recess. As the senators filed out, Graham left without making eye contact with anyone. The viral moment was complete. Within minutes of the hearing recess, the internet detonated. The video clip of Crockett's response to Graham spread across every social media platform. Twitter users created hashtags that immediately began trending worldwide. TikTok videos with millions of views materialized within hours. Mainstream media outlets picked up the story before the hearing had even reconvened. In the Capitol hallways during the recess, staffers huddled around their phones watching and rewatching the exchange. Democratic aides were practically euphoric, forwarding the clip to colleagues and constituents. Republican staffers were quieter, some defending Graham, others privately acknowledging that he had walked into a trap of his own making. Outside the committee room, reporters surrounded anyone willing to comment. Democratic senators praised Crockett's performance. Republican senators either declined to comment or offered carefully worded statements about respecting all witnesses. Nobody wanted to defend Graham's approach too vigorously. Not when the clip was already achieving viral status. Back in her office, Crockett's staff was overwhelmed. Her phone exploded with congratulatory text messages. Her social media mentions increased tenfold within 20 minutes. Campaign contribution notifications flooded her email inbox. The moment had struck a chord, extending far beyond the voting rights debate. Crockett destroys Graham trended #1 on Twitter for the entire afternoon and evening. The full exchange was viewed over 50 million times across various platforms within the first 24 hours. Political commentators from across the ideological spectrum couldn't stop discussing it. Within the first hour alone, the clip generated over 5 million impressions on Twitter. Users were creating reaction threads, analyzing every moment of the exchange frame by frame. Political science professors were using it as a real-time example in their classes. Communications experts were dissecting Crockett's technique, her timing, her delivery, her strategic patience. Progressive accounts celebrated Crockett as a new champion. One viral tweet declared, "This is what we need more of in Congress. People who won't back down, who come with receipts, who refuse to be intimidated by the old guard." Jasmine Crockett just became a superstar. Another popular post analyzed the exchange strategically. Crockett let Graham think he was winning. She let him get comfortable, let him reveal his condescension. Then she pulled out receipts he didn't know existed. That's not just courage. That's strategy. That's preparation meeting opportunity. But the reaction wasn't purely partisan. Some conservative commentators, while disagreeing with Crockett's politics, acknowledged the effectiveness of her response. One prominent Republican strategist tweeted, "You don't have to agree with her positions to recognize that Jasmine Crockett absolutely demolished Lindsey Graham today. He underestimated her and paid the price." Memes proliferated wildly. Side-by-side images of Graham's smirk before the exchange, and his shocked expression afterward became instant classics. GIFs of Crockett's calm, measured delivery, while dismantling Graham's credibility, were shared millions of times. The moment had transcended politics and become pure viral phenomenon. Cable news networks played the clip on endless loop. CNN brought in political analysts to dissect every moment of the exchange. MSNBC featured segments praising Crockett's performance. Even Fox News, while more critical of Crockett's politics, acknowledged that Graham had been outmaneuvered. The New York Times ran a piece titled "How a Freshman Representative Schooled a Senate Veteran." The Washington Post analyzed the moment as a generational shift in Democratic politics. Politico examined Graham's history of political pivots and how Crockett had weaponized that history against him. Political talk shows devoted entire segments to the confrontation. Morning Joe spent nearly 20 minutes discussing it. The View brought in political experts to analyze the implications. Late-night comedians used the clip in their monologues, with Stephen Colbert joking that Graham got read like a bedtime story. For the first 24 hours after the hearing, Lindsey Graham said nothing publicly. His social media accounts were uncharacteristically quiet. His office released a brief statement saying the senator stands by his questions and believes the hearing was productive. Nobody believed it. Republican colleagues were equally silent. Some privately admitted that Graham had badly miscalculated. Others suggested he should have known better than to underestimate someone who had built their reputation on courtroom advocacy. A few younger Republican staffers anonymously told reporters that moments like this were exactly why their party was struggling to connect with younger voters. When Graham finally addressed the incident 3 days later during a Fox News interview, he tried to downplay it. "I think Representative Crockett is a talented person," he said carefully. "We had a spirited exchange, which is what hearings are for. I don't think either of us said anything we regret." But his body language told a different story. He looked uncomfortable throughout the interview, deflecting questions about the exchange whenever possible. The confident swagger that had characterized his behavior during the hearing was nowhere to be seen. For Jasmine Crockett, the confrontation became a defining moment. Her social media following exploded, gaining over 2 million new followers across platforms in a single week. Her fundraising numbers skyrocketed, with small dollar donations pouring in from across the country. Progressive organizations began reaching out, wanting to partner with her on various initiatives. But Crockett was careful not to let the moment define her entire career. In interviews following the hearing, she consistently redirected attention back to the substance of the voting rights debate. "I didn't go to that hearing to have a viral moment," she told one reporter. "I went to advocate for my constituents and for Americans who are facing barriers to voting. If standing up to condescension becomes the story, that's fine. But their story should be about protecting democracy." Her colleagues in the House took notice. Democratic leadership began inviting her to more high-profile committee assignments. She was asked to appear on Sunday morning political shows, where she demonstrated the same command of policy details that had impressed observers during the Graham exchange. Slowly, but surely, she was establishing herself as more than just a viral sensation. She was becoming a serious political force. The confrontation sparked a larger conversation about generational change in American politics. Political scientists and commentators began analyzing what the moment represented. A younger generation refusing to defer to institutional authority simply because of seniority. A more diverse Congress challenging traditional power structures. And a shift in how political battles are fought in the age of social media. Some veteran politicians took note and adjusted their approach when dealing with younger colleagues. Others doubled down, dismissing the exchange as a one-off moment that didn't represent any real shift in power dynamics. But the message was clear. Underestimating someone based on their age, gender, or relative newness to Washington was a mistake that could go viral in minutes. The moment also highlighted the importance of preparation and authenticity in modern politics. Crockett hadn't won the exchange through rehearsed zingers or carefully crafted sound bites. She had won by being genuinely knowledgeable about the issues, by having done her homework on Graham's record, and by refusing to accept condescension as the price of entry into political debates. Months after the hearing, the exchange between Graham and Crockett continued to resonate. Political communication professors used it as a case study in their classes. Young people considering careers in politics cited it as inspiration. Democratic candidates in competitive races highlighted their support for representatives like Crockett, who weren't afraid to challenge establishment figures. For Graham, the moment became part of his legacy, though not in the way he would have hoped. In profiles and articles about his long career, the Crockett exchange was inevitably mentioned as an example of how the political landscape had changed around him. Some supporters defended him, saying one viral moment shouldn't define decades of service. Others suggested it revealed deeper issues with how he approached his role and his constituents. For Crockett, the viral moment opened doors, but also created pressure. Every subsequent appearance was scrutinized, with observers wondering if she could maintain the same level of effectiveness. To her credit, she largely succeeded, combining the passion that had made her famous with the policy expertise that gave her credibility. She became a regular fixture on cable news, a sought-after campaign surrogate, and a rising star within the Democratic Party. The Graham-Crockett confrontation offered several important lessons for anyone following politics or aspiring to enter public service. These insights went beyond the immediate drama and spoke to deeper truths about power, preparation, and persistence. Never underestimate your opponent based on superficial characteristics. Graham's dismissal of Crockett because of her relative youth and newness to Washington directly contributed to his embarrassment. Preparation matters more than experience. Crockett's thorough research into Graham's record gave her the ammunition she needed. All the institutional knowledge in the world couldn't protect Graham from his own documented contradictions. Authenticity resonates in the social media age. Crockett's response felt genuine because it was. She wasn't performing for the cameras. She was defending her work and her constituents. That authenticity is what made the moment go viral. Know when to push back and how to do it effectively. Crockett didn't respond to Graham's initial condescension immediately. She waited for the right moment, then delivered a systematic, fact-based response that he couldn't dismiss as emotion or theatrics. One moment can change perceptions, but sustaining credibility requires consistent work. Crockett understood that the viral moment was an opportunity, not a destination. She used it to amplify her message but didn't rest on it. As the dust settled on the confrontation, both Graham and Crockett moved forward with their careers. Graham continued his work in the Senate, though perhaps more cautious about dismissing witnesses in hearings. Crockett built on her newfound prominence, using it to push for the voting rights legislation that had been the original subject of the hearing. The confrontation between Lindsey Graham and Jasmine Crockett will be remembered as one of those rare political moments that transcended the usual partisan divide. It wasn't about left versus right, Democrat versus Republican. It was about respect, preparation, and the courage to stand up when someone tries to put you down. Graham learned that seniority and institutional power can't protect you from your own record or from someone who has done their homework. Crockett proved that being underestimated can actually be an advantage if you're prepared to flip the script. And millions of viewers learned that sometimes the most powerful response to condescension isn't anger or volume. It's calm, documented facts delivered with conviction. If you enjoyed this breakdown of one of the most explosive political confrontations of the year, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that like button. We're bringing you more insider stories, political showdowns, and the moments that really matter in Washington. Drop a comment below and let us know, who do you think will be Jasmine Crockett's next high-profile opponent? And which politician do you want to see us cover next? The battle for America's future is happening right now in committee rooms, on House floors, and in Senate chambers. Don't miss a moment.